Well, good morning, everyone. And we're going to have a little bit of a change here. I won't be discussing genetics. I will be discussing an effort that the U.S. has been involved in through ICAR. So, for some of you probably don't know who ICAR is and what it does, so I'll give you an update on that and what ICAR stands for. And probably you may not be aware of it, but I think most of you in this audience will have some involvement with the work that ICAR has done. And then I'll talk about the sustainability effort. So first things first, ICAR is the leading global provider of guidelines, standards, and certification of animal identification, animal recording, and animal evaluations. If you run a milk recording organization, your meters, your laboratories all follow ICAR standards. And it's not just in the US, it's pretty much worldwide. AI companies follow ICAR standards, genomic evaluations. The ID tags dairy farmers put in their cows, a lot of those follow ICAR standards. So historically, ICAR is a non-government organization. It was established back in 1951 in Rome, Italy. Their current headquarters is in the Netherlands. And they are the registration authority for the ID tags conforming to the ISO standards. And typically those are your low frequency, half duplex, full duplex tags that a lot of our dairy farms are applying to their animals with the 840 numbers. So ICAR is also looking at being a responsible entity in the dairy industry. So they want to contribute to a sustainable food chain and keeping in mind that's beneficial to open markets long term. Again, this is not just US, this is worldwide. So ICAR believes that an unbiased scientific approach provides the right fundamental framework for these common systems. So I'll give you a little flavor of who all participates in ICAR. All the countries you see here in dark blue are members. There's 132, 85 full members and 47 associate members across 55 countries, and several of the folks in the audience here, including myself, attend their meetings and participate in ICAR working groups. Amongst their core products and services, they set guidelines by which we operate. They have certification services, evaluation services, and a lot of seminars and workshops. And I myself serve as a committee chair on Animal Data Exchange Working Group. As you can see at the bottom, obviously a big player is Animal ID, which is important to all our efforts. Without Animal ID, we can't really operate. There would not be any genetic evaluations. Animal recording, everything we discussed this morning that's being recorded from milk weights, lab results, etc., follows through ICAR. Evaluations and animal data management. So that's a little bit about ICAR and the role they play in our ecosystem. So let's move to sustainable agriculture. So when somebody says, what is the definition of sustainability? I don't know if there's one definition that we can all gather around. It means different things to different people. However, the working group I was part of, we had to come up with a definition for the use within ICAR. So instead of coming up with our own, we actually found one within the SAI platform that you can read here. Sustainable agriculture, efficient long-term production of safe, high-quality agriculture product in a way that protects and improves the natural environment, the social and economic conditions of the farmers, their employees, and local communities, while safeguarding the health and welfare of all farm species. So that's basically the definition we started working with to figure out what role does ICAR play in this. So we had two working groups. This work originated almost 2 years ago, where we looked at what traits are we recording through our dairy recording systems that have an impact on sustainability. The one thing we came up right away was our role is not to build an index. It was pretty apparent that an index in the Netherlands or Germany or Australia would be quite different than an index we would define here in the US or Canada. However, the building blocks that go into that index should be standardized, because a lot of the retailers and processors of dairy products, they want something that is not calculated differently across the world. So if a country wants to establish an index, that's up to them. They can decide if certain building blocks need to be part of it or not, and how they weigh them. So our role was to find out which key traits are we recording and maybe recording in the future that have an impact on sustainability. And then the second part is, what is the definition of those traits, and try to harmonize the methods of these key traits. So it breaks down in two sets of traits. One is through our milk recording systems, we have snapshot data. We gather information over monthly, bi-monthly. However, there's variability from month to month in the data, and we want to make sure that if we come up with a measure, it's not going to bounce around, from month to month on an individual herd. So we're looking at a 365-day period that takes into account geography. A herd in Texas is going to have more impact in the summer than the winter, while a herd up in Wisconsin might be the opposite, where the winter is going to have a negative impact. Seasonal calving, we got countries like New Zealand where they have seasonal calving, and also environmental impact as it relates to the weather needs to be taken into account. And we sometimes see herd size fluctuation. So looking at these measures over a full year takes into account some of these variations. As I mentioned, there's two things that we need to look at snapshot data. Those are things that we measure maybe once a month or 10 times a year, like average daily milk on a herd, or counts. For example, how many animals were culled less than 60 days in milk over a 365-day period. So those are the two types of data points that we looked at. So how should you interpret test day snapshot data? Basically, you calculate a weighted average using the monthly points, or maybe there's only 10 in a year, to come up with an annual number. And we would use all the test day data that's collected in that 365-day period. As far as counts and percentages, we would look at a 365-day window for the population that we will be counting against. And as mentioned here below, an example would be cows died within first 60 days in milk. We would use a window that goes back 60 days up to 365 plus 60 days and count the animals that were culled within a herd less than 60 days, or died within less than 60 days in milk. There's a lot of traits. There's almost 40 of them that we define, and you can break it down in 5 groups. And here's just an example of some of the traits that were defined to have an impact on sustainability. Feeding, fertility, health, longevity, and young stock, and you can each read some of the examples with each category. Here's an example of how we would calculate, for example, a test day based average. So we would take a herd's somatic cell count for a particular test day, multiplied times the milk yield, and then divided by the sum of all the milk yields to come up with an annual somatic cell count. So this is typical data most countries are already recording, but as far as what is an annual average, that's probably not defined the same across countries. Another example here is percent cows culled due to lameness. So that's more of a count. So it would start counting in that 365-day period the number of animals and divide by the average herd size within that period, including dry and producing animals. In the case of lameness, sometimes cows are culled for more than one reason. Lameness needs to be one of them. So those are 2 examples of a lot of the calculations that have been defined by the working group that are available through the website. So that brings us to, so what are we going to do? All the information is published on the ICAR website. You can scan the code or you can go to the website listed below. But we want to make this available to the wider audience. Some countries have already moved forward. Canada has listed now some of these traits, and NMR in the UK has worked with Tesco, which is a big grocery store chain there, and working in this environment where you can see certain measures on farms. So it's usable data for hopefully the processors and retailers of dairy products, but also from a farm perspective, you can look at how are you changing over time, are you improving on any of these measures. So the key is, this information needs to be shared with other partners like IDF, and other members of the working group beside myself have had communications with them. I'm presenting here as a member of the working group. And the last slide here basically tells you the participants. So this was an international group. I was the US representative, but this was the second group. There was a first group which was a little bit larger that worked on making the list. This was all reviewed through the ICAR board. And now it's up to the individual countries to decide how they wish to implement this information. So in the US, we've started some of the discussions between the 4 dairy record processing centers, National DHIA, CDCB, about how we could establish a US-based standard for those traits that were defined by ICAR, and that can then potentially be used in building a US-based index related to sustainability.